Module 28, Operant Conditioning's Applications, and comparing it to classical conditioning. In this module, we'll be identifying some ways to apply operant conditioning principles to your life, and we'll be identifying characteristics that distinguish operant conditioning from classical conditioning, which I think you already have a pretty good grasp on. Applications of operant conditioning. Would you like to apply operant conditioning principles to your own life to be like healthier, a more successful student, a higher achieving athlete? Reinforcement technologies are at work in school, sports, workplaces, and homes, and these principles can support our self-improvement as well. At school, 50 years ago, Skinner envisioned a day when teaching machines and textbooks would shape learning in small steps, immediately reinforcing correct responses. He believed that such machines and texts would revolutionize education and free teachers to actually focus on each student's special needs. Good instruction demands a couple of things, Skinner said. Students must be told immediately whether what they do is right or wrong, and when right, they must be directed as to what the next step is to be taken. Skinner might be pleased to know that many of his ideals for education are now possible. Teachers used to find it difficult to pace material to each student's rate of learning and to provide prompt feedback, but electronic adaptive quizzing does both. Students move through quizzes at their own pace according to their own level of understanding, and they get immediate feedback on their efforts. In sports, the key to shaping behavior and athletic performance, as elsewhere, is reinforcing small successes and then gradually increasing the challenge. Golf students can learn putting by starting with very short putts, and then as they build mastery, eventually stepping back farther and farther. Novice batters can begin with half swings at an oversized ball, pitched from 10 feet away, giving them immediate pleasure of smacking the ball. As the hitter's confidence builds, and with their success, they achieve mastery at each level. Then the pitcher gradually moves back to 15, 22, 30, 40.5 feet, introducing a standard baseball. Compared with children taught by conventional methods, those trained by these behavioral methods have shown faster skill improvement. In sports, as in the laboratory, the accidental timing of rewards can produce superstitious behaviors. If a Skinner box food dispenser gives a pellet of food every 15 minutes, whatever the animal happened to be doing just before the food arrives, perhaps scratching itself, is more likely to be repeated and reinforced, which occasionally can produce a persistent, superstitious behavior. Likewise, if a baseball or softball player gets a hit after tapping the plate with a bat, he or she might associate that and be likely to do it again. Over time, the player might experience partial reinforcement for what becomes a superstitious behavior. At home, as we have seen, parents can learn from operant conditioning practices. Parent training researchers remind us by saying, "Get ready for bed," but caving in to protest and defiance, parents reinforce whining and arguing. Exasperated, they may even yell or gesture menacingly. When the child, now frightened, obeys, that reinforces the parent's angry behavior. Over time, a destructive parent-child relationship can develop from such things. I wanted you to pay attention to what we just said about that. So who conditioned who? The kid actually conditioned the parents, it happens sometimes. We're skipping kind of an at-work category, but I'm going to throw it in here because I guess it could fall under self-improvement. Knowing that reinforcers influence productivity, many organizations have actually invited employees to share the risks and rewards of company ownership. Others focus on enforcing a job well done. Rewards are most likely to increase productivity if the desired performance has been well defined and is achievable. The message for managers: reward specific achievable behaviors, not vaguely defined merit. Operant conditioning also reminds us that reinforcement should be immediate. IBM legend Thomas Watson understood that. When he observed an achievement, he wrote an employee a check on the spot. But rewards need not be material. People could write notes of appreciation for a completed project. A simple thank you and a smile sometimes works. As Skinner said, how much richer would the whole world be if the reinforcers in daily life were more effectively contingent upon actually productive work? For self-improvement, Finally, we can use operant conditioning in our own lives. To build up your self-control, you need to reinforce your own desired behaviors, perhaps to exercise more often, for example, and extinguish the undesired ones, to stop texting while studying, for example. Psychologists suggest taking a couple of steps. State your goal in a measurable way and announce it. Make it public. You might, for example, aim to boost your study time by an hour a day. Share that goal with some close friends, or with somebody at least. Second, monitor how often you engage in your desired behavior. You might log your current study time, noting under what conditions you do study and when you don't. Reinforce the desired behavior. To increase your study time, give yourself some sort of reward, a snack, or some activity you enjoy, only after you finish your extra hour of study. Agree with your friends that you're going to join them for weekend activities only after you've met your realistic weekly studying goal. Contrasting classical and operant conditioning. Both classical and operant conditioning are forms of associative learning, which we've talked about for the last couple of days, and both involve acquisition, extinction, spontaneous recovery, something called generalization and discrimination. But these two forms of learning also differ. Through classical, Pavlovian kind of conditioning, we associate different stimuli we do not control, and we respond automatically. Through operant conditioning, we associate our own behavior that act on our environment to produce reward and punishment. As we will see in the next piece, our biology and cognitive processes influence both classical and operant conditioning. So really quickly, we'll go through this chart. Classical conditioning, the response is involuntary or automatic, like your face scrunching up when somebody sprays water in your face, for example. Under operant conditioning, the response is voluntary and operates on the environment. Classical conditioning acquisition. Associating events. The neutral stimulus is paired with an unconditioned stimulus and becomes a conditioned stimulus. Operant conditioning associates response with the consequence, reinforcer, or punishing behavior. In extinction, in the classical conditioning side, the conditioned response decreases when the conditioned stimulus is repeatedly presented alone, whereas in operant conditioning, the responding decreases when reinforcement stops. Spontaneous recovery. The reappearance after a rest period of an extinguished conditioned response versus the reappearance after a rest period of an extinguished response. In classical conditioning, generalization is the tendency to respond to stimuli similar to the conditioned stimulus. An organism's response to similar stimuli is also reinforced. Lastly, the learned ability to distinguish between conditioned stimulus and other stimuli that do not signal an unconditioned stimulus. And organisms learn that certain responses, but not others, will be reinforced.